Hi, I'm Nicole Vogelsinger, and today we're working with a monochrome color palette. Let me share my latest hoop. This is Dark Opulence. This hoop is one color palette, which depending on how you work could be very easy for you to put together, or it could be a challenge like it sometimes is for me. So let me take you closer into this project and show you what we're going to be doing. I'm going to be working with an entirely black and silver color palette today. I told you it's monochrome and it can sometimes be challenging for me to stay with a limited color palette like this. So I kind of did go with two colors. Yours might be black. You might pick an entirely different color palette, and that's totally fine. One thing that I like to do as I'm picking out my supplies, though, I will gather more than I actually need, as long as they're all in that color palette. So I chose all of my black beads, had them all on my desk so that I could have lots of options while I was working on this. So as we go through the supplies, think about that. Think about the colors that you might want to work with and have fun with this limited color palette. So let's talk about the supplies that we're going to need for this project. So for the project, you are going to need fabric. We're going to talk more about apparel fabric, and I'm going to take you on a little field trip to talk about the types of fabric that you're going to want to look for. You will need a pair of scissors, some needles, and an embroidery hoop. I will be using a 9-inch embroidery hoop, and you can just choose a size that works for you and works for the supplies that you're going to have. For threads, you are going to see me use the good thread. I'm using all black. This is what I'm going to be using for all of the beading on my project. And I'm also going to be using DMC's Cotton Redders mat. This is the Wonderfill Specialty Threads. This is the Pearl Cotton. This is size 3. And I'm also going to be using, this is also by Wonderfill, it's Dazzle. And I can take the little protector thing off. This is a metallic, like shiny thread, and we will talk about the threads when we get to that part of the project as well. I'm going to be using a lot of beads. I'll be using fiber craft beads. I've got size 6 beads, a lot of size 8 beads. You'll see me also using size 11s and size 2s. So gather up your beads and you can use a little bit of everything for this project. I love the sequins and beads kit, and I will be using a lot of the sequins from this kit for my project. For accent beads, I will be using one of the Masterpiece collections, which has, for this project, I'm using my black beads. So colors that match your project. I also will be using the Sew On rhinestones in various sizes. I love these because of the shine that they give and the lightweightness that they give to a project. And the bead landing, these are the Preciosa check crystals. So we're going to go on a little fabric field trip, and I want to show you some things to look for. Now, this fabric is an apparel fabric, super pretty, very stretchy, very see-through. Not the greatest fabric to use for beading. These all have a lot of shine to them, which I think is perfect for a project where you're adding a lot of beads because it helps to accentuate the shine of the beads. Always check to see how stretchy it is though, because if it's too stretchy, it's not going to hold the beads up in the hoop. Denim fabric is a great choice when you're thinking about beading because it is a sturdier fabric and can hold the weight of the beads. So I love using denim in my projects. I love all things tulle, but tulle is not great for heavily beading your project. So I'm not going to get this one today. And again, from a distance, these look like they might be the right weight, but look at how much stretch there is. When you see that much stretch, you know that it's not going to work. And here's my winner. It has the right amount of shine. It doesn't have stretch. It is not see-through, and so it is going to be perfect for the project that we're working on today. Okay, so let's get started by hooping up our fabric. You just want to make sure that your hoop fits your cut of fabric, and I had gotten 1/3 of a yard of this, and you can see that it's going to fit my hoop just perfectly. Now, the one thing to note about apparel fabric when you're cutting it, you will sometimes have a little bit more fraying than you would have with a quilting cotton. So just be aware of that. There's no problem. Like, we don't have to do anything differently. Just note that, like, you can see these edges are already frayed pretty badly. So you just might be picking threads off of your work as you are working. So I'm going to trim this fabric though, all the way around the hoop, leaving about 2 to 3 inches. It cuts very easily. This is a thinner type apparel fabric. If you chose like a denim or something like that, you just might notice it's a little trickier to cut. Again, not a problem. Your scissors will work just fine. And a denim, if you're working with that, there is like a decent amount of fraying with denim too. Okay. My fabric is in my hoop and I am ready to get stitching. Before I start stitching, I am going to make a few circles on my fabric. So I'm just using my water-soluble pencil and a stencil. You can eyeball these, you can use a stencil, you can trace something. And I'm using a larger hoop because I wanted more of the space to be taken up. I want to be able to see some of the fabric, and there are going to be sections where I'm not going to have any beading at all. So I'm just going to pick a size and trace it onto. I'm going to just start with 1 right now. You can always add more. If you put 1 on here and you don't like the placement of it, it's water soluble. So you grab a Q-tip with some water and you just erase your marks and let it dry and start over again. So I'm adding a little bit of a metallic thread into this project. Because I'm working with more of a solid color, I want to have a variety in the threads that I use. So this is the Dazzle by Wonderfill. Any metallic thread that you feel comfortable working with, and you don't even need to use a metallic. I'm going to be also showing you what it looks like just with a pearl cotton. So I like to vary the threads that I use, just like I like to vary the beads that I use. I'm tying a knot in the end of my thread. Sometimes with the more metallic threads, you might see what just happened there. They can fray a little bit more. So I'll just twist it like this. Another thing that I like to use if my threads are being a little uncooperative and fraying like that, or not fraying, just unwinding. This is just a thread gloss, and you can just take your thread and kind of pull it through this. And what it does is just makes it a little bit easier to then thread that needle. Pinching the thread between my fingers and bringing the needle to that thread will help, and then it just slips right through. So I bring my thread up and I'm holding it with my thumb, and then I'm going to make my next little line, same exact size, and I'm coming up on the line that I have drawn of the circle. I'm making sure that my thumb is holding this thread down, so I'm taking it over the working thread, just like that. And then I'm always repositioning my thread as I stitch this one. And I'm taking my needle and I'm making the same length stitch right now, coming up on the line, holding this thread with my thumb as I pull it through. Now the fun thing about this stitch is I can change or I can vary the length of the lines. So now you can see my stitch is going to be whatever portion of the needle is hidden behind the fabric, that's how long your stitch is going to be. So that can help you to just gauge what your stitches are going to look like. And I'm just going to keep going all the way around, doing the same exact thing, coming up on the line. You'll notice that your thread wants to get a little bit twisty. That happens. You can sometimes tilt your hoop upside down and just let your needle hang and it will unravel that way. Now you can see I'm running short on thread. I thought I had cut enough thread, but this stitch does take up a decent amount of thread. So if you run out of thread as you're working on this, what I'm going to do is just take my needle down right on the other side of that stitch so you can see that I've just anchored it. I then run my needle and thread back under a few of these stitches. Because this thread is a little bit shiny and kind of slippery, I am going to tie a knot so that it doesn't start to work its way undone and then the stitches start to work their way undone too. Normally, if I am just stitching with a thread, I don't worry about tying knots. Just winding it under a few stitches is okay. But this thread, it's beautiful to work with. I love it, but it does like to unravel. And now I'm going to cut a new length of thread and restart. So tie a knot again, give it a nice tug. And I'm going to continue. I'm bringing my thread up again where I had ended that last stitch. And then I'm going to pretend as if my thread never came undone, or as if I never ran out of thread. So bringing it up so close to that last stitch, you can't even tell looking at this where my thread ended and where it began. So don't be nervous if you run out of thread. It is easily fixable. So I'm finishing it up. I need to close up the gap right here. If I were to add another stitch, it wouldn't look right because there's just not enough space and that would definitely look off. So what I'm going to do is take my thread down and just make that little bar right there. And again, you can't really tell where the thread started, where it ended. And even if it is noticeable, we are going to be covering this whole project with so many beads and so many sequins. So it's really not going to be a problem and nobody is going to notice little things like that. So just end your thread with a few knots. And there is the first portion of our hoop. So for the next part where we're going to start the beaded embroidery, I am using black, the good thread. This is thin enough that it will work with all the beads. It'll go through the fabric really well. And the idea of this, I know it looks like a sun right now. It will not look like a sun the whole time or when we're finished doing this. But this gives us a boundary to work with. I like to create, when I'm encrusting an entire piece of fabric with beads, I like to give myself boundaries to work within, and then I kind of work from there gradually, um, building up dimension and building up stitches. So what we're going to be doing is filling in some of this circle with stacks of beads. So you can see I have small beads here. I am using a bunch of beads. Oops, I'm using size 8. Let's see, lots of size 8 beads. I have a bunch of colors. As I was picking through, I just pulled out any colors that I thought would match my project. I also have size 11 beads. They're going to be my little toppers. So what we're going to do is I'm going to bring my needle up. I did 2 of these little bead stacks to show you what we're going to be working with. Now this does not have to be perfectly symmetrical. I'm going to be leaving some of the fabric without any beads at all, but I do want to build up some dimension in the circle. So I'm going to put 3 beads on my needle, and I'm just picking randomly. I'm going to be mixing and matching all of the colors. So I've got 3 of my size 8 beads. And now my little topper is going to be a size 11 bead. So I'm putting all of those on. I'm holding on to the 11, the tiniest little bead. And then I'm going to take my needle back down through the other 3 beads. So this little bead that I'm holding on to, that is going to hold all of these together. I call it the little topper because it's just securing the beads in place. You can see sideways, it looks really cool. And I'm going to go all the way around the circle. And then I might do one more layer. And I'm going to be building dimension and then lowering the dimension. So I'm going to be doing a variety of 2 and 3 bead stacks first, all the way around. And then we're going to do some smaller bead stacks. So I'm varying the heights of them. So I'm going to do another 3 stack, add my topper bead. So I've got 4 beads on my needle. And then I just hold on to that tiny bead as I take the others down. And then I just secure it. So I'm just going to work on my bead stacks inside of this circle. I'm going to share from this angle so you can see just how many beads I've used. And then I will show you from above. You can see I didn't want to make it symmetrical, so it's not symmetrical. I started with the outer edges. I have stacks of 3 and 4 beads, and then moving on in, I have stacks of 2, and then I went down to stacks of 1. And now we're going to add some sequins. So I am using the sequins and beads kit, which I absolutely love because look at the sequins that I have here. I have 3 different sizes, and I'm going to use these teeny tiny little iridescent ones. So I'm just going to grab a bead tray and put a few in here. I'm not sure how many I'm going to need. I don't like to put tons in there because I usually end up tipping them at some point, and I don't want to make a huge mess. So all we're going to do now is I'm going to bring my needle up. I'm going to be starting the sequins in this area and probably just doing the same thing. I don't think I'm going to have any sequins up here. I'm just going to be scattering them around. I don't want this to be a symmetrical area. So I'm bringing my needle up. I'm going to put one of the teeny tiny sequins on my needle. This is a little time consuming because you're stitching one at a time on. So once it's there, I just take my needle on the outside of the sequin, and I'm going to be catching my thread because I've got lots of layers here, and then I'm just securing it like that. So yes, this is a little bit time consuming, and you might have found when you work with the stacked beads, because we're using smaller beads, the size 8s, it takes a little while to fill up this area. But I do think the effect of stacking a smaller bead like this, when you look at it from a distance, or even when you look at it up close, it looks so cool. So I really do think it is worth the time that you're going to spend with this. So I'm just adding some sequins one by one to this area down here. So here's what it looks like with my sequins. You can see I tucked little ones back there under the beads, but the majority of them are down here. The reason I had wanted to use an apparel fabric was because I knew that I was going to be leaving blank spaces throughout here, and I wanted a sheen to the fabric so that the open space looks as if it is part of the project. And one other tip that I have, if you're working on this and you're not sure if you're done or if you need to add more, I always suggest taking a picture of your progress and looking at it through your picture and not at the hoop. Because when you look at it through the picture, you can kind of gauge, is there something that sticks out to you? Is there an area that needs to be fixed? So periodically throughout your project, take pictures and look at them that way, and you can see how your project is progressing. Okay, so once we finished the first one, we're adding a second one that kind of just butts up next to it. And for this one, I picked a different thread. You don't have to. I also chose a larger circle from the stencils because I'm just varying my sizes on this. Again, these are all decisions that I'm making, but you have to decide what looks good on yours. But we're going to be doing 3 of these. So that's the next step. So for this one, I used a size 3 pearl cotton. This is the largest of the pearl cottons, and I love it because you can just cut it right from the spool and not have to separate threads, which works great. And for the third circle, I'm going to be using probably a pure black matte cotton. For the beads, we're going a little bit larger with this one because this is a larger circle. So the bottom beads, I have some of you can see I already poured them out. These are the 32 check seed beads. And I also have the fiber craft beads. So that's the bottom layer. In between the beads this time, I'm using the other 2 sequins. So I'm doing large bead, large sequin, size 6 bead, medium sequin, and then my topper bead this time is going to be a size 8 seed bead. So you can see I'm just going up with my sizes of seed beads. I'm going to do the same exact thing, same exact technique. And when you're stitching through the sequins, I'll demonstrate one. I'm bringing my needle up again. I'm going to put one of the large seed beads on. I'm putting the large sequin. I'm picking the size 6 seed bead, the medium sequin. This is why I love having the variety of sequins here. And then my topper bead, the size 8 bead. And that's the one that I'm going to hold on to. And then I'm taking my needle down through the sequins and down through the bead. This stack is going to have a lot of shine because of the sequins. So you can see from the side, that's what it looks like. It's standing a little bit taller than this one, but it's not crazy tall. We're just noticing the beads are a little bit wider, but I'm still going to do the same thing. I'm going to go around the outer edge with these. And then as I bring this lower, I'm probably going to be doing the same stacks that I did over here and just graduating the depth around and then adding my sequins in. So I'm going to go ahead and finish 2 more of these and then we'll see what it looks like. So I am mid-circle, and this one is finished, but I wanted to show you how to stitch when these are very close and you're kind of like meeting the lines with the other lines of the blanket stitch. So I've stitched just like I showed you here, and I'm coming up to the point where I'm going to be meeting these little lines. And you can see in this section here, I did it. I alternated the size of some of the lines. Some parts I didn't add a line at all. So I'm going to show you how I did that in case you are working on stitching your circles very close together like I am. So I'm just going to add my stitch just like I have been doing. And now it's getting to the point where each of my stitches is going to be closer together and touching the next circle. So as I'm making my way around, you see I've come to this point. My next one will be right here. So what I'm doing is just going down right at the end of that line, and I'm just coming up very close to, it's such a tiny little stitch now that I'm making. Just like that. And remember, however much needle is behind the fabric, that's how long your little spoke is going to be. So this is going to be a tiny one. So I'm going to take that through. And when you get to this point with the other 2 circles, your thread is going to want to keep catching on the raised beads. So you just want to be careful. Don't yank your thread too hard because you don't want to rip any beads off. I'm going to meet up with this one right here and do another tiny little stitch, just like that. Now with this one, this silver line of thread is already touching this line right here. So I'm not going to make the leap of going to that one just yet, because if I were to do a stitch, it wouldn't be, it's kind of like making it a straight line rather than a circle. So I'm going to meet up with this one right here with both of these stitches to do a tiny little spoke right there. I'm using a thicker thread and going through the apparel fabric. I'm just being very aware of my stitches underneath as I'm meeting with the other threads. Yes, I got tangled in this knot, so I'm just going to fix that. There we go. When you get lots of threads and lots of beads going on, you just have to be aware of that. So I'm just going to go through there, make sure I'm not going through that thread. Okay, that should be better. Okay, now this is the point where I'm not going to do a little spike. All I'm going to do is just a little straight stitch right on the border of my circle to carry it along. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm actually going to come up and make like a back stitch and go down right here. And I think I'm going to do the same thing right here because this is so close. Just like that. And now I can get back to making my lines. I'm going to bring my thread up on this line. Oops, I caught some more threads back here. Unravel those. Okay. Bring my thread up. And now I'm just carrying on exactly the same way. And I'm going to finish it up. So that's how you maneuver things when you are stitching your circles very close together. I think I can fit one more in here. And then I'm going to end it with just a straight stitch because I don't want to do another line in there. So I'm just going to, I'm kind of going to anchor that one and do my stitch like that. So when you look at it, you don't even notice that these don't have little spikes coming off of it. It just matches up with the lines, and now I'm going to add more beads. Here we are. Before we move on, let's just have a moment to appreciate all of these sequins and all of these stacked beads. What I think is really cool about this technique is just by varying the colors of the beads that you use, varying the sequin placement, you could do an entire project with just this stitch and this bead stacked technique, and it would look amazing. So appreciate what you've done up to this point. I'm just going to sit here and look at this sparkle. How gorgeous. So now we're going to focus on the spokes around here, and I'm going to show you a few different techniques that you can mix and match and fill in these areas if you want. You also can leave the spokes just plain because we're going to have lots of other stuff going on. And so there is, like, you want to look at it and decide if the balance needs things on the ends or on the insides of every piece. So this is part of where you're going to be making this piece your own. I'm going to show you things that you can do, and then you can pick and choose what you want to do for your project. So I'm going to be using these gorgeous, the bead landing. These are the Preciosa. They're 6mm check crystals. And what I love is just look at the shine there. So we need a lot of shine when you're working with one color palette. Well, I say it's one color palette. I'm using like blacks and silvers and some gray. You want to be sure that you have some visual interest throughout the piece. And so that's what I'm going to be doing. We're going to be attaching these to the ends of this larger wheel right here. And I am just going to start with this part. I'm starting right here because this one's not overlapping or not meeting up with any of these areas. So I'm bringing my needle and thread up. I'm going to put one bead on here. Take it down. And then I want to make sure that it's going to lay flat. And so I'm just laying it down exactly where I want it. And then I'm going to take my needle and thread. And remember, you've got a lot going on. Don't pull your thread too hard, especially if it's catching on other beads. Depending on how heavy your crystal is. Now, this is not a heavy crystal. However, I think I'm going to go through it a second time with this thread just to make sure that it's not going anywhere. Sometimes with larger beads, you want to just make sure they're not wobbling around, that you're not getting movement if you don't want movement in that area, and just doing another little stitch through it will secure it a little bit more. And so I'm going to just do the same thing. I'm going to take my needle up, grab a crystal, admire the sparkle, bring it down, make sure it's laying flat, and then take my needle down. And then I'm going to go through it one more time. So I'm going to do this to all of these spokes on this circle. So here's how it looks with all of the crystals on the edges. What I like about this technique is it's still leaving some blank space where you can see the shine of the apparel fabric coming through, which again was my goal in choosing this fabric, but it's also extending the sparkle factor that you have going on. And when you're working with a hoop like this, you just want to make sure as you're working on it that your focus isn't on one particular area. You kind of want your eye as you're looking at it to shift throughout the project. And so by extending some of the sparkle, some of the shine, your eye isn't focused on just one particular spot. It's starting to travel throughout the hoop. So that is your goal with a project like this. Now we're going to be using bugle beads, and I'm going to be filling in some of the gaps along here with the bugle beads. Depending on the size of like what size you left or what amount of space you left in here, your bugle beads, the amount that you use is going to vary from mine. And even on mine, I may vary. I have 3 here, 3 here. I may have a space that's a little larger, a little smaller. So just vary your bugle beads according to your stitches. So I'm bringing my needle up, putting a bugle bead on, and then I'm just going to take it down right there. I'm keeping these lined up in the section of space that I have. And I'm using the same color bugle beads as the fabric because all I want at this point is the shine from the bugle beads, and I want to see that there's something going on, but I don't want a lot of other color here. So just like this, you can decide you really like this look and go back along your other sections and add more in. For right now, I'm just going to keep stitching along here. Here's what it's going to look like when it is all stitched up with the bugle beads. We're going to be using more bugle beads in a little bit, but let's do one more treatment around this area. So for this next part, I'm going to be using the Crystal Lane Sew On Rhinestones, which I absolutely love using these. It looks as if I added them here, but I didn't. This is a little tip for if you're not sure where you're going with your embroidery. What I like to do, especially with larger beads, because it's definitely easier the larger the bead, lay your rhinestones or your beads out on the fabric and decide if you like how it looks with the spacing. I just took a bunch off. I think I honestly like the fuller look more, but you can play around with, do you want them closer in? Do you want them further out? Do you want to vary these with other larger beads? You could do some bead stacking. So you really can play around with this a lot, and this is the opportunity to do that. Before you even stitch anything on, get an idea for what you like and what looks right to you, and then you can start stitching things on. For mine, I'm going to go with a slightly more spaced out look, but I do like them extended because, again, I feel like it just extends your eye. It's still leaving open space, which my plan was from the start. And so now I'm going to remember how I did this, take them all off, and start stitching them on one at a time. With these, this is really easy to stitch these on because you can see in the back there are little holes, several of them that I can use, and I can use as many or as few as I want, which is really cool. So the way that you're going to do this on fabric, I'm just positioning it right now and bringing my needle up. I'm holding the bead with my thumb, and I'm just going to take my needle through the bead. It's going to come off the fabric, obviously. And then I'm going to place it back down and hold the thread tight because I want to make sure that the thread is actually going to be holding this bead tight. And then I'm going to take the needle and thread down. Now the nice thing about these sew-on rhinestones having so many holes is that I don't need to double stitch any of them because I'm going to be using all of the available holes to be able to stitch them down, and so they are really going to be secure. If you were using these beads on a garment, you would definitely have the security of knowing they weren't going anywhere, which I really like. So I did my 2 stitches that way, and now I'm going to come up at the top and do the same exact thing. I have 2 more spots where I can bring my needle through and just really secure it down. These are also really lightweight, so they're not weighing the hoop down. This is a hoop that is going to feel heavier because of the weight of the beads and everything. So if you have the opportunity to use beads or these rhinestones that are a little bit lighter, it just makes it easier on your hands as you are stitching. So that looks beautiful. I'm going to go and finish the rest of my rhinestones. Here is what I have. There are my rhinestones, which I love. We've focused a lot on circles at this point, by this point. And so now we're going to be adding in a few lines. We're going to be adding in lines of bugle beads. So I'm going to be looking at this area over here. I'm using a lot of bugle beads. You can decide, again, you get to pick how you want this hoop to look, and yours might look different than mine using all the same techniques and everything. So I'm just picking a place to start. I'm still using my beading thread. So I'm just going to fill this thread with bugle beads. I'm not sure how many I'm going to be using yet. This is something that we're going to gauge as we work on it. But we're going to have strands of bugle beads. I'm going to mix in probably size 8 seed beads as well. But right now, because we have a lot of circles going on and I want to be adding buttons later, I want something to draw the eye down to the bottom of the hoop at this point. So I'm just going to fill this. I'm going to work from one end all the way to the bottom of the hoop. So I'm going to go through a lot of beads. And I'm just going to keep gauging about where I'm at. This actually isn't going to take quite as long as you might think because the beads do string up very quickly. And I think I'm going to add 2 or 3 more. I want to extend mine all the way to the bottom of the hoop. It's going to give it some dramatic elegance, which is the look that I'm going for with this monotone hoop. So I want some straight lines here. I think, you know what? I think I might add one more. You can always change your mind. You could take that one bead off. I want the line of beads to stay flat on the fabric. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm just making sure that I push all the beads nice and tight together. And then I'm going to take my needle down right underneath the last bead. Now it's going to go wobbly until I pull my thread through. Just like that. And now I'm going to bring my needle up and I'm going to start another line of beads a little bit higher, but it's going to be right next to these beads. So you can see when you pull it, it tightens these up. And I'm going to fill this with beads again. So there's my second line of beads. This is going to be an element that I am going to keep consistent throughout this hoop. So we've got our 3 large circles. They're kind of the focal point right now. These lines of beads are almost going to act as a background to this. I want them to be here, but I don't want them to be the focal point. So I'm also going to be thinking of empty space in this hoop. I have some empty space up here. I'm going to be filling a few lines of bugle beads up here. I'm going to be adding buttons into this area, but where I have empty space, I'm going to again be doing this. So this is the element that is going to unify the whole piece. Right now it's not looking very unified, but you just have to keep working at it because it will get there. In between the bugle beads on some of the lines, I'm going to be adding the size 8 black seed beads. So again, it's all the same color, so it's not going to be distracting you. It's going to look like something is on the fabric and there is elegance, but it's not going to be overwhelming with busyness because again, these are kind of the focal point of this hoop. So I'm going to keep adding this. I might add a few up here. I'm going to pause on adding them over here until I see where I want to place the other larger elements of this project. So I think this is giving very Art Deco vibes. These, I just absolutely love the detail that this gives this project, while also kind of staying in the background and letting these three have their moment. So this is going to take a lot of bugle beads. I've gone through almost an entire tube just on this area, and I know that I'm still going to be filling in any sections here. So just prepare with the bugle beads. I would have 2 tubes of whatever color you're using just to be on the safe side. I'm also going to go in and scatter some black sequins throughout. But now I want to focus on the larger buttons that I'm going to be adding. I love buttons. I'm a button collector. And so these are ones I recently purchased. They're Lamode buttons. I picked this one because of the detailing around the outer edges, and this one because of all of the holes that I am going to bead. So let me show you how to do that. So the first thing I'm going to do is secure my button in place just with probably 2 little stitches. I'm using the beading thread for this, which is a lighter thread than I would normally use, but I'm going to have a lot of threads going in and out of this that are going to secure the button. And so I'm not really worried about it. I think it's going to stay in place just fine when all my stitches are done. So I'm just starting with a little X right now. And the button is on there. Not super secure, again, heavier button, lighter thread. I'm going to next bring my needle up through the bottom hole. I'm going to bring it all the way through. I am going to be adding size 8 beads and the smaller sized sequins. And I'm just going to be doing bead, sequin. These were from the Sequins and Beads kit, the middle size. So I'm just going to be doing a small strand of beads and sequins. It's going to look like that on the needle. And you can gauge the length once you have several on your needle. It can be helpful to just gauge the length of your strand. I'm going to want mine hanging down, but I don't want it to go too far down past the button because I do have another button that I'm going to be adding. And this is just to give this middle a little bit of detail. So I think I'm going to add just a few more of each. And I think maybe 1 or 2 more. Okay, I'm going to end with, I think I'm going to end with a sequin on this one rather than a bead. So now remember these bead stacks we did where we had a topper bead that kept everything in place? The last thing that you put on your beading string is going to be your topper. So my last sequin that I put on here is going to be the piece that holds this all together. So I'm going to hold the sequin back and I'm going to take my needle through everything else, all the beads, all the sequins. You want to make sure you don't miss any as you're going through. and I'm going to go back down into the buttonhole and take my strand with me. So you can see that the sequin on the end is laying, you can see it more than the other sequins, which I kind of wanted that appearance. I wanted to see the sequin a little better. I'm going to do that into each one of the holes. And then because these are larger holes, I can actually get another strand or two in each hole. So I'm just going to keep adding these strands of varying lengths until I'm happy with the drapiness that's coming out of this button. And if you feel like your button's a little loose, I think I might do one more X before I do the rest of the bead strands, just to keep it a little more secure as I'm stitching. So here is the button with all of the bead strands. I did several in each hole, and I varied the lengths of them, and I think it looks pretty cool. So for this one, I already attached the button. I'm doing it slightly different this time around. I'm not going to be making long strands of beads, but I am going to be making strands of beads that go from one hole to the next. So here's what I mean. I'm going to put a bunch of beads on my needle. You want enough beads so that when we go from one hole to the next, it's going to make like a slight arch. And so you can decide how many beads you want in that arch. So I'm going to take it down into the whole diagonal from this one. And you can see now it looks like I've got a little arch right there. I am going to keep doing that. If you hold the thread a little tighter, it becomes like a true arch, and if you let it go loose, it just kind of becomes a drapey arch. So you can decide how you want that to look. For my next one, I'm going to add more beads. This hole has this button has 9 holes, so I'm going to vary the placement of them, which also means that I'm going to vary how many beads are going to go on each little arch that I'm creating. I want it to kind of look like a random tangle of beads. So let's see, we have about that many. I'm gonna go from one to another diagonal, and I think in each hole of the button I'm going to be going through like once or twice with extra strands of beads, just so that it does start to kind of look like a nice tangle of beads. And I'm going to be going over and under different sections of the beaded arches that I'm making. I'm going to make some pretty short so that it fills in the space. My goal is that I don't really want to see the holes on the button anymore. All I want to see are little like archways of beads going from one buttonhole to the next. So I'm going to keep working on this. It's going to take a little bit because I'm going to create lots of little arches of beads, and I'm using all one color, and I'm using the size 8 check seed beads. Okay, here's what it looks like, both buttons. I think this looks so super cool, and I love that it you know that it's a button, but it also kind of hides the fact that it's a button because it's just completely covered with beads. I love both of these. I don't know which one I like more because I think they both look really cool. So now, these are the main pieces of your embroidery project. I might add a smaller button or two. I think I'm going to, I have the Masterpiece collection, these accent beads in different colors. I might add them throughout here. I have some of the larger sew-on rhinestones, which are more of an oval shape. And so I'm just going to be filling in the rest of this. I'm going to be adding more strands of the bugle beads once I know for certain where all of my larger pieces are. And you can see any small areas, I'm just filling in with the bugle beads. I wanted there to be open space. So my open space is here. It's in the bars of the circles. So there is open space throughout, but I also want to fill the whole hoop. And so that's what I'm going to be doing with my accent beads, with more strands of this, maybe another button or two using the same treatment that we used here. And I'm going to complete this hoop. Well, here is my fully beaded, beautiful and sparkly hoop. Definitely dramatic. What I did was I added more of the bugles and check beads the same way that I was doing over here. I have my 2 buttons that I showed you, and then I did a 3rd button. I added more sequins around. You can never have too many sequins. These were from my stash. I added some of the beads that I showed you, the accent beads, a few of the rhinestones. I had more of the Preciosa crystals that I added throughout. Just trying to balance and have your eye not focus on just one area. There was a lot of sparkle going on here, so I wanted to carry that down here. I wanted to carry this element of the straight bugle bead rows throughout different areas. And I also wanted some blank space, so I scattered the crystals all around. So now we're going to finish it up. I always tighten my hoop. If you've watched my videos before, this part of the process will look very familiar to you. The only thing that's slightly different with an apparel fabric is how well the glue will stick to the fabric. So there's one part of the process that's just slightly different when I glue the fabric to the hoop. As I'm looking at this with the fabric trimmed, I think one further thing I could do if I wanted to was paint the hoop with acrylic paint. To do that, you would wait until your project has been completely glued, dried. You would take the outer hoop off and just paint it carefully with an acrylic paint before you let it dry. And then once it's dry, you just put the top part of the hoop back on and you have a new hoop. So this part of the process is the same as my other hoops. The different thing with acrylic fabric, and you'll notice with thicker fabrics sometimes, quilting cottons stick really well and the glue, does its job. Everything holds well. You just let it dry and that's that. With a fabric like this, I will sometimes need to use my Wonder Clips to secure the fabric. So you'll notice that as soon as I fold the fabric over, it's not staying where it normally would stay. And when I'm working with a quilting cotton, that doesn't happen. So the only thing that's different now is as I'm making my way around the hoop, I am just adding Wonder Clips to hold the fabric in place while it dries. And then once it's dry, you don't need to worry about the fabric coming undone at all. But you are going to need to let this dry at least an hour or so. You want to wait until you can't feel the glue through the fabric anymore. And I'm just going to let this dry now. So I have been letting this dry, And I can now take the wonder clips off, and the glue has adhered the fabric to the hoop, and it is completely done. Now, if you wanted to cover up your stitches, one method of doing that is to take a piece of felt, just a piece of craft felt, cut it the size of your hoop. And I usually use pinking shears to just give it a nice edge all the way around. And then just pressing the felt to the back of the fabric will keep it there, and it will cover up your stitches if you want to do that. I like to admire the hoop guts, and so I don't cover up the stitches for my projects, just because I like to flip it over and see everything that I did. So let's look at this one more time. You'll notice when you get to this point in the project, your hoop has some weight to it. It's got a lot going on depending on how many buttons you've used, the types of beads that you've used. This has a lot of sequins and a lot of the lighter rhinestones, so the weight is distributed evenly. It feels pretty even throughout, and it doesn't feel overly heavy. The fabric is able to support the amount of beads that are on it, and I think it looks really good. So there wasn't a pattern for this project. This is a free-spirited sort of project where you are experimenting with stitches and beads to create a piece that is unique to you. And I hope that you enjoy the challenge that a project like this is. It is challenging sometimes to start with a blank piece of fabric and just kind of go without a pattern, but I think that's the fun part of it. And so I hope you enjoy this, and happy stitching.